Iceland, an island nation located in the North Atlantic Ocean, is often celebrated for its stunning natural beauty, towering volcanoes, expansive glaciers, and breathtaking fjords. But the story of Iceland begins long before any humans set foot on its shores. The island's history is deeply rooted in the powerful forces of nature that shaped it millions of years ago. In this chapter, we will explore the geological formation of Iceland, tracing its origins back to the violent volcanic activity that gave birth to the landmass, and we'll delve into the prehistoric environment that existed long before humans arrived. The formation of Iceland can be traced back to the Miocene epoch, around 20 million years ago, during a period of intense volcanic activity. The island is located on the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, a massive underwater mountain range that runs through the Atlantic Ocean. This ridge marks the boundary between the North American and Eurasian tectonic plates, which are slowly moving apart at a rate of about 2 centimeters per year. As these plates diverge, magma from the Earth's mantle rises to fill the gap, creating new crust and leading to frequent volcanic eruptions. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge is one of the most geologically active regions on the planet, and it is here that Iceland began to form. The island itself is essentially a large accumulation of volcanic rock, built up over millions of years through a series of eruptions. These eruptions were not continuous but occurred in cycles, with periods of intense volcanic activity followed by quieter phases. The volcanic origins of Iceland are still evident today, as the island continues to experience frequent eruptions and earthquakes, reminding us that it is a land in constant flux. One of the most significant features of Iceland's geology is the presence of a mantle plume, also known as a hotspot, beneath the island. This plume is a column of hot, partially molten rock that rises from deep within the Earth's mantle, providing an additional source of magma. The combination of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge and the Icelandic mantle plume has resulted in the island's unique geological characteristics, including its high volcanic activity and the formation of large volcanic systems, such as the one that created the island of Surtsey in 1963. Over the course of millions of years, volcanic activity gradually built up the landmass that would become Iceland. The first land to emerge above sea level was likely a series of volcanic islands, which eventually coalesced to form a larger island. As the volcanic activity continued, the island expanded, creating the rugged landscape we see today, with its mountains, valleys, and plateaus. The highest peaks in Iceland, such as Hvanadalshnúkur, the tallest point in the country, are the remnants of ancient volcanic systems. Iceland's geological history is also closely tied to the glacial periods that have occurred over the past few million years. During these ice ages, large portions of the island were covered by glaciers, which played a crucial role in shaping the landscape. The weight of the glaciers carved out deep valleys, fjords, and other geological features, while the melting of the glaciers during warmer periods contributed to the formation of rivers and lakes. The glaciers also left behind deposits of sediment, which enriched the soil and provided a foundation for the development of Iceland's ecosystems. The combination of volcanic and glacial activity has given Iceland its unique landscape, characterized by dramatic contrasts between fire and ice. The island is home to some of the most active volcanoes in the world, including Hekla, Katla, and Age of Geological, which have had a significant impact on both the local environment and global climate. At the same time, Iceland's glaciers, such as Vatnajökull, the largest glacier in Europe, are among the most spectacular natural wonders on the planet. Before human settlement, Iceland's environment was shaped by the interactions between its volcanic activity, glacial processes, and the surrounding ocean. The island's location in the North Atlantic meant that it was subject to the influence of ocean currents, including the warm North Atlantic Current and the cold East Greenland Current. These currents played a key role in determining the island's climate and contributed to the development of its unique ecosystems. The first ecosystems to develop on Iceland were likely dominated by hardy plant species capable of surviving in the harsh volcanic and glacial environment. Mosses, lichens, and other pioneer species would have been among the first to colonize the newly formed land, gradually breaking down the volcanic rock and creating soil that could support more complex plant life. Over time, these ecosystems would have evolved, leading to the development of forests, wetlands, and other habitats. Iceland's location also made it a key area for the migration of birds and marine mammals. The island's rugged coastline, with its numerous cliffs and fjords, provided ideal nesting sites for seabirds, while its surrounding waters were rich in fish and other marine life, attracting whales, seals, and other marine mammals. These species would have been among the earliest inhabitants of Iceland, long before the arrival of humans. The prehistoric environment of Iceland was a dynamic and ever-changing landscape, shaped by the powerful forces of nature. Volcanic eruptions, glacial advances and retreats, and the influence of ocean currents all played a role in creating the island's unique environment. This environment provided a foundation for the ecosystems that would develop on the island and set the stage for the eventual arrival of human settlers. As we explore the history of Iceland, it is important to remember that the island's story is not just one of human settlement and culture, but also of the powerful natural forces that have shaped the land over millions of years. The geological history of Iceland is a testament to the dynamic processes that continue to shape our planet, and it serves as a reminder of the deep connection between the land and the people who inhabit it. The story of human habitation in Iceland begins in the late 9th century, during a time of great exploration and expansion by the Norse people of Scandinavia. These seafaring warriors, traders, and settlers ventured across the North Atlantic, exploring and colonizing new lands, driven by a combination of overpopulation, political unrest, and the search for new opportunities. Iceland, with its uninhabited and fertile lands, became one of the last great frontiers of the Norse expansion. This chapter delves into the arrival of the first settlers in Iceland, the challenges they faced, and the establishment of early Icelandic society. The first known Norse explorer to set eyes on Iceland was likely Narration, a Norwegian Viking who, according to later Icelandic sagas, discovered the island accidentally around 860 AD. While sailing from Norway to the Faroe Islands, Narration was blown off course and landed on the eastern coast of Iceland. After exploring the region briefly, he returned to the Faroe Islands and reported his findings. Following Narration, another explorer, the Swedish Viking Geir Svaversson, circumnavigated the island and confirmed that it was indeed an island, which he named Geirarselmi after himself. However, the credit for the first permanent settlement in Iceland is generally given to a Norwegian chieftain named Ingolfur Arnarsson. According to the Landnámabók, the Book of Settlements, a medieval Icelandic manuscript detailing the settlement of Iceland, Ingolfur left Norway around 874 AD due to a blood feud and the increasing centralization of power under King Harald Fairhair. Ingolfur and his family set sail for Iceland, bringing with them slaves, livestock, and other necessities for establishing a new home. Upon reaching Iceland, Ingolfur performed a traditional Norse ritual, casting his high seat pillars, symbolic wooden posts, into the sea and vowing to settle wherever they landed. The pillars eventually washed ashore in what is now Reykjavik, the capital of Iceland. Ingolfur and his household settled in this area, making him the first permanent Norse settler in Iceland. The name Reykjavik means Bay of Smoke, likely referring to the steam rising from the hot springs in the area, a characteristic feature of Iceland's geothermal activity. Following Ingolfur's successful settlement, word of Iceland's fertile lands and abundant resources spread quickly throughout Norway and the wider Norse world. Over the next few decades, a wave of Norse settlers, primarily from Norway but also from the British Isles, arrived in Iceland. These settlers were not only seeking new land but also escaping the growing power of Norwegian kings, who were increasingly imposing their authority over the previously independent chieftains. The Landnámabók records the names and deeds of these early settlers, providing a detailed account of the settlement process. According to the manuscript, approximately 430 men, along with their families and dependents, were responsible for claiming most of the habitable land in Iceland. Each settler established a homestead, often in a valley or along a fjord, where they built longhouses, cleared land for farming, and raised livestock. The early settlers brought with them the farming techniques, tools, and animals necessary for survival in a harsh and unfamiliar environment. The settlers of Iceland faced significant challenges in adapting to their new home. The island's volcanic activity, harsh climate, and limited resources required the settlers to be resourceful and resilient. The long, Dark winters, punctuated by brief, intense summers, demanded careful planning and preparation. Livestock, including sheep, cattle, and horses, became the backbone of the Icelandic economy, providing food, clothing, and transportation. The settlers also relied on fishing and hunting for sustenance, particularly during the winter months when farming was impossible. Despite these challenges, the Norse settlers successfully established a thriving society in Iceland. The early Icelandic society was organized around the family unit, with each household led by a chieftain, known as a gwa. The gwa was both a political and religious leader, responsible for representing the interests of their followers, known as ingmen at regional assemblies or things. These assemblies were crucial in maintaining order and resolving disputes within the community, as there was no central authority or king in Iceland. The most significant of these assemblies was the Alþingi, or the Icelandic Parliament, which was established around 930 AD. The Alþingi was one of the earliest examples of a parliamentary system in the world, and it served as the primary legislative and judicial body in Iceland. The Alþingi met annually at Ingvellir, a natural amphitheater located in the southwestern part of the island. Here, the chieftains and their followers would gather to discuss matters of law, resolve disputes, and make decisions that affected the entire island. The legal system in early Iceland was based on the concept of customary law, which was passed down orally through generations. The laws were recited by the law speaker, an official elected by the Alþingi, who served as both a legal expert and a repository of Icelandic law. The law speaker's role was crucial in maintaining the continuity and stability of Icelandic society, as the absence of a central authority meant that disputes had to be resolved through negotiation and consensus rather than force. The early settlers of Iceland also brought with them their religious beliefs, which were rooted in Norse paganism. The Norse gods, including Odin, Thor, and Freya, played a central role in the spiritual life of the settlers, and rituals and sacrifices were performed to ensure the favor of the gods. The Gor, as both political and religious leaders, were responsible for organizing these rituals and maintaining the sacred sites, known as Haf, where the gods were worshipped. The settlement of Iceland was not only a physical process but also a cultural one. The settlers brought with them the rich oral tradition of the Norse sagas, epic stories that recounted the deeds of heroes, gods, and ancestors. These sagas were passed down through generations, preserving the history and culture of the early Icelanders. The writing down of these sagas in later centuries would become one of Iceland's most significant contributions to world literature. As the population of Iceland grew, the island became increasingly self-sufficient. The settlers adapted to their new environment, developing unique practices and customs that reflected their isolation and the challenges they faced. The early Icelandic society was characterized by a strong sense of independence and self-reliance, traits that would continue to define the Icelandic people throughout their history. By the end of the 10th century, Iceland had transformed from an uninhabited volcanic island into a thriving Norse society. The settlers had established a stable and organized community with a functioning legal system, a rich cultural life, and a deep connection to the land. The foundations of Icelandic society had been laid, and the island was poised to play a significant role in the history of the North Atlantic. As Icelandic society began to stabilize and flourish in the late 9th and 10th centuries, it remained deeply rooted in Norse paganism, a belief system centered around a pantheon of gods and goddesses, such as Odin, Thor, and Freya. These deities were integral to the spiritual life of the early Icelanders, who performed rituals and sacrifices to ensure their favor. However, as the influence of Christianity spread across Europe, Iceland found itself at a crossroads. The conversion to Christianity would mark one of the most significant cultural and societal shifts in Iceland's history. This chapter delves into the Christianization of Iceland, exploring the processes, conflicts, and eventual acceptance of the new faith. The spread of Christianity to Iceland was part of a broader trend occurring throughout Scandinavia and Northern Europe during the Viking Age. By the late 10th century, many of the Norse homelands, including Norway and Denmark, were in the process of converting to Christianity, often under the influence or pressure of powerful kings who saw the new religion as a means to unify their realms and strengthen their authority. In Norway, King Olaf Tryggvason, a fervent Christian, played a crucial role in promoting the faith among his subjects and extending his influence to Iceland. The first recorded attempt to introduce Christianity to Iceland occurred around 981 AD, when a missionary named Thorvald Konradsson arrived on the island. Thorvald was accompanied by a bishop named Fryrek, and together they sought to convert the Icelanders to Christianity. However, their efforts were met with resistance from the pagan population, and Thorvald's mission ultimately failed. The Icelandic sagas recount that Thorvald and Fryrek faced hostility, with several of their followers being killed in clashes with pagan chieftains. Despite this setback, Thorvald's mission marked the beginning of a series of efforts to introduce Christianity to Iceland. The turning point in the Christianization of Iceland came with the arrival of another missionary, Olafur Tryggvason, who would later become King of Norway. In 995 AD, Olafur was baptized as a Christian and began a campaign to spread Christianity throughout his kingdom. Recognizing the strategic importance of Iceland, Olafur sought to bring the island under his religious and political influence. He sent a group of Christian missionaries to Iceland, led by Stefnir Orgilsson and Angbrandur, with the mission of converting the Icelandic chieftains. The introduction of Christianity to Iceland was not just a matter of religious conversion. It was also deeply intertwined with politics and power. The chieftains, who held significant influence over their followers, were key to the success of the Christian mission. Olafur's approach was pragmatic. He used both persuasion and coercion to convince the Icelandic chieftains to accept Christianity. Those who resisted were threatened with reprisals, including the possibility of military intervention from Norway. However, Olafur also offered incentives to those who converted, such as gifts and promises of trade advantages. The efforts of Olafur's missionaries met with mixed success. Angbrandur, in particular, is remembered for his aggressive and sometimes violent methods of conversion. The Icelandic sagas describe him as a warrior priest who clashed with pagan chieftains, leading to several deaths. Despite his controversial methods, Angbrandur succeeded in converting some influential Icelanders to Christianity, including the powerful chieftain Suhallar or Steenson. However, Angbrandur's mission ultimately faced strong resistance, and he was forced to leave Iceland, reporting to Olafur that the island was too stubbornly pagan to be converted. Despite these challenges, the spread of Christianity in Iceland continued, driven in part by the growing influence of converted chieftains and the pressure from Norway. By the end of the 10th century, Iceland was deeply divided between those who adhered to the Old Norse gods and those who had embraced Christianity. This religious tension threatened to destabilize the island, as conflicts arose between pagan and Christian factions. The situation came to a head around the year 1000 AD, when the Alþingi, Iceland's national assembly, was faced with the task of resolving the religious divide. The Alþingi, which had been established as a forum for legal and political decision-making, now found itself at the center of a religious crisis. The chieftains, recognizing the potential for civil war if the conflict was not resolved, sought a peaceful solution that would preserve the unity of Icelandic society. The decision on whether to adopt Christianity as the official religion of Iceland was entrusted to the law speaker, Orgir Svetningagoy. Orgir was a respected chieftain known for his wisdom and impartiality, and his role as law speaker made him the custodian of Icelandic law. After deliberating for a day and a night, Orgir announced his decision. Iceland would officially adopt Christianity as its national religion, but certain pagan practices would be allowed to continue in private. This compromise, known as the Christianity Law Kristnakultur, was designed to prevent conflict and ensure a peaceful transition to the new faith. Orgir's decision was met with broad acceptance, and the conversion of Iceland was carried out with relatively little bloodshed compared to other regions of Europe. The Alþingi formally declared Iceland a Christian nation, and the practice of pagan rituals, such as the worship of the Norse gods, was gradually phased out. However, the decision also allowed for some flexibility. Certain pagan customs, such as the eating of horse meat and the exposure of unwanted infants, were permitted to continue for a time, reflecting the pragmatic approach to conversion in Iceland. The adoption of Christianity had profound effects on Icelandic society. One of the most immediate changes was the construction of churches and the establishment of a formal clergy. The first Christian churches in Iceland were modest wooden structures, often built on the estates of powerful chieftains who had converted to Christianity. These early churches became centers of religious and social life, where the Icelandic people gathered for worship, education, and community events. The introduction of Christianity also brought with it new forms of literacy and learning. The Christian clergy were among the first in Iceland to be trained in the art of writing, using the Latin alphabet. This development marked the beginning of Iceland's literary tradition, which would later produce some of the most important works of medieval literature, including the Icelandic sagas and the Eddas. The writing down of these oral traditions preserved the history, culture, and mythology of the early Icelanders for future generations. The conversion to Christianity also led to changes in the legal and social structure of Iceland. The Alþingi, which had previously been responsible for overseeing the pagan rituals and the worship of the Norse gods, now took on the role of regulating Christian practices. The introduction of church law, known as Kristinréttur, established rules governing the conduct of the clergy, the administration of sacraments, and the observance of Christian holidays. The church also played a role in the administration of justice, particularly in cases involving moral or religious offenses. Despite the official adoption of Christianity, the transition from paganism was a gradual process. Many Icelanders continued to hold on to their old beliefs and customs, blending elements of paganism with their new Christian faith. This syncretism is evident in the Icelandic sagas, which often depict characters invoking both the Norse gods and the Christian God in times of need. The enduring presence of paganism in Icelandic culture is a testament to the deep roots of Norse mythology and the resilience of the island's traditional beliefs. The Christianization of Iceland was a turning point in the island's history, marking the end of the pagan era and the beginning of a new chapter in Icelandic society. The adoption of Christianity brought Iceland into closer contact with the rest of Europe, fostering cultural and intellectual exchange. At the same time, the pragmatic and peaceful approach to conversion helped to preserve the unity and stability of Icelandic society, allowing the island to navigate the challenges of the medieval period. As Iceland embraced its new Christian identity, it continued to develop as a unique and vibrant society, blending its Norse heritage with the influences of the wider European world. The legacy of the Christianization of Iceland can still be seen today, in the country's religious practices, cultural traditions, and enduring sense of independence. Following the Christianization of Iceland around the year 1000 AD, the island entered a period of significant social, political, and cultural development. This era, known as the Icelandic Commonwealth or Free State, lasted from the establishment of the Alþingi in 930 AD until the country came under Norwegian rule in the late 13th century. During this time, Iceland developed a unique form of governance, characterized by a lack of a central monarch and a reliance on a legal and judicial system that emphasized consensus and negotiation. This chapter explores the Icelandic Commonwealth, the society it fostered, and the rise of the Icelandic sagas, which became one of the most important literary traditions in medieval Europe. The Icelandic Commonwealth was a remarkable experiment in self-governance. Unlike most other European countries of the time, Iceland had no king or central ruler. Instead, the island was divided into regions known as gur, each governed by a chieftain or gwa. These gur were not hereditary nobles but rather powerful individuals who gained their status through wealth, influence, and the support of their followers. The gur were responsible for maintaining order within their regions, representing their followers at the Alþingi, and overseeing the administration of justice. The Alþingi, which met annually at Ingvellir, was the heart of the Icelandic Commonwealth. It was here that the chieftains and their followers gathered to discuss matters of law, resolve disputes, and make decisions that affected the entire island. The Alþingi was both a legislative and judicial body, and it operated on the principles of consensus and negotiation. The laws of Iceland were not written down but were instead passed down orally by the law speaker, who recited them at the Alþingi. This oral tradition ensured that the law remained flexible and adaptable, allowing Icelandic society to respond to changing circumstances. One of the most distinctive features of the Icelandic Commonwealth was its legal system. Disputes between individuals or groups were typically resolved through a process of arbitration and compensation, rather than through violence or warfare. The concept of blood money, or financial compensation for injuries or deaths, was central to the Icelandic legal system. This system of justice helped to prevent feuds from escalating into larger conflicts, although it was not always successful in maintaining peace. Icelandic society was still marked by periodic clashes between powerful families, known as feuds, which could sometimes lead to violence. The lack of a central authority meant that Icelandic society was highly decentralized, with power distributed among the various chieftains. This decentralization allowed for a great deal of local autonomy, but it also created challenges in maintaining unity and stability. The Gore were often involved in complex networks of alliances and rivalries, and the balance of power on the island was constantly shifting. Despite these challenges, the Icelandic Commonwealth was remarkably stable for much of its existence, thanks to the strong tradition of law and the commitment of the Icelanders to resolving disputes through legal means. The Icelandic Commonwealth was also a period of cultural flourishing, particularly in the area of literature. The 12th and 13th centuries saw the rise of the Icelandic sagas, a body of prose narratives that chronicled the lives and deeds of the early settlers, as well as the legendary heroes and events of Icelandic history. These sagas, written in Old Norse, are considered some of the greatest literary achievements of the medieval period, and they provide a valuable window into the society, culture, and values of early Iceland. The Icelandic sagas can be broadly divided into several categories, including the family sagas, Islandingasögur, the legendary sagas, Fornaldarsagur, the king's sagas, Konungasagur, and the sagas of Icelandic bishops, Biskupasagur. The family sagas are perhaps the most famous, as they recount the lives of the early settlers and their descendants, focusing on themes such as honor, loyalty, vengeance, and the struggles for power and influence. These sagas, while based on historical events, are often embellished with elements of legend and myth, reflecting the oral tradition in which they were rooted. One of the most famous of the family sagas is Njál's saga, which tells the story of a complex and tragic feud between several families in southern Iceland. The saga explores themes of justice, revenge, and the consequences of violence, and it provides a detailed portrayal of Icelandic society during the Commonwealth period. Other well-known sagas include Egil's saga, which follows the life of the warrior poet Egil Skallagrimsson, and Laxdæla saga, which chronicles the lives of the people of the Laxardalur Valley. The legendary sagas, on the other hand, are more fantastical in nature, drawing on the rich mythological traditions of the Norse people. These sagas often feature heroes who embark on epic quests, battle supernatural beings, and encounter the gods themselves. The legendary sagas blend history and myth, creating stories that resonate with the values and beliefs of the Icelandic people. The king's sagas, written in the 12th and 13th centuries, recount the histories of the kings of Norway, Denmark, and other Scandinavian countries. These sagas were often written by Icelandic scholars and reflect the close cultural and political ties between Iceland and the Scandinavian mainland. One of the most famous of the king's sagas is Heimskringla, written by the Icelandic historian Snorri Sturluson. Heimskringla traces the history of the Norwegian kings from the legendary Yngling dynasty to the reign of King Magnus Erlingsson in the 12th century. The sagas of Icelandic bishops focus on the lives and deeds of the early Christian leaders of Iceland. These sagas, which were often written by clerics, provide valuable insights into the process of Christianization in Iceland and the challenges faced by the early church. The bishop sagas also reflect the ongoing tension between the pagan traditions of the early settlers and the new Christian faith. The writing of the Icelandic sagas was closely linked to the introduction of Christianity and the development of literacy in Iceland. The Christian clergy, who were among the first to be trained in the art of writing, played a crucial role in recording the oral traditions of the sagas. The preservation of these stories in written form allowed them to be passed down through the centuries and ensured that they would become a central part of Icelandic cultural identity. The sagas were not only a means of preserving history and culture, but also a form of entertainment and education. They were often read aloud at gatherings, providing an opportunity for the Icelandic people to connect with their past and reflect on the values and lessons embodied in the stories. The sagas also served as a way of reinforcing social norms and expectations, particularly those related to honor, loyalty, and justice. The Icelandic Commonwealth and the rise of the sagas represent a golden age in Iceland's history, a period of relative stability, cultural flourishing, and legal innovation. However, this period was not without its challenges. The decentralized nature of Icelandic society, combined with the lack of a central authority, made the island vulnerable to internal conflicts and external pressures. As the 13th century progressed, these challenges would come to a head, leading to the eventual decline of the Commonwealth and the island's submission to foreign rule. The Icelandic Commonwealth, which had flourished for over 3 centuries, was a unique experiment in self-governance and decentralized rule. However, by the early 13th century, the Commonwealth began to experience significant internal strife, culminating in a period of intense conflict known as the Age of the Sturlungs. This era, marked by power struggles between rival chieftains and families, ultimately led to the weakening of the Commonwealth and paved the way for Iceland's submission to Norwegian rule. This chapter explores the factors that contributed to the decline of the Commonwealth, the events of the Age of the Sturlungs, and the eventual end of Icelandic independence. The seeds of the Commonwealth's decline were sown in the very structure that had allowed it to thrive. The Gore, or chieftains, who wielded considerable power within their regions, were not bound by any central authority. This decentralization, while providing local autonomy, also led to the concentration of power in the hands of a few dominant families. As these families sought to expand their influence, Iceland became increasingly divided by rivalries and feuds, which undermined the stability of the Commonwealth. The Age of the Sturlungs, named after the powerful Sturlung family, was the most tumultuous period in Icelandic history. It lasted from roughly 1220 to 1264 and was characterized by a series of bloody conflicts between rival chieftains and their supporters. The Sturlung family, which included prominent figures such as Snorri Sturluson, played a central role in these conflicts, seeking to consolidate power and control over Iceland. The rise of the Sturlungs was fueled by their close ties to the Norwegian crown. In the early 13th century, Norway was undergoing a process of centralization under the rule of King Håkon Håkonarsson, Håkon the Old. The Norwegian king sought to extend his influence over Iceland, viewing the island as a valuable territory within his expanding realm. The Sturlungs, particularly Snorri Sturluson, cultivated a relationship with the Norwegian court, recognizing the potential benefits of aligning themselves with a powerful monarch. Snorri Sturluson, a poet, historian, and chieftain, was one of the most influential figures of the period. He was known for his literary works, including the Prose Edda and the Heimskringla, which chronicled the history of the Norwegian kings. Snorri's connections to the Norwegian court made him a key player in Icelandic politics, and he used his influence to advance the interests of his family. However, Snorri's ambitions also made him a target for rival chieftains, leading to a series of conflicts that would have devastating consequences for Iceland. The Sturlung era was marked by a series of violent clashes between rival factions, each vying for control of the island. These conflicts, known as the Sturlung conflicts, were driven by a combination of personal rivalries, power struggles, and the desire for territorial expansion. The battles were often brutal, with entire families being wiped out, farms burned, and communities devastated. The violence reached its peak in the 1230s and 1240s, with battles such as the Battle of Religstair in 1238 and the Battle of Hogsnes in 1246, both of which were significant in the scale of their bloodshed. The Battle of Religstair, fought on August 21, 1238, was the largest and bloodiest battle in Icelandic history. It was a confrontation between the forces of Sturla Sævatsson, a leader of the Sturlung family, and Gizur Orvaldsson, a rival chieftain from the Hochdýlar family. Sturla, who had ambitions of unifying Iceland under his rule, sought to eliminate his rivals and consolidate his power. However, Gizur, with the support of other chieftains, was able to defeat Sturla's forces, leading to the death of Sturla and the collapse of his ambitions. The defeat of Sturla Sævatsson was a significant blow to the Sturlung family, but it did not bring an end to the conflicts. The power struggles continued, with Snorri Sturluson himself becoming a target. In 1241, Snorri was assassinated at his home in Reykholt on the orders of Gizur Orvaldsson, who had been acting under the instructions of King Håkon of Norway. Snorri's death marked the beginning of the end for the Sturlung family's dominance and signaled a shift in the balance of power in Iceland. As the conflicts raged on, the Norwegian crown took an increasingly active role in Icelandic affairs. King Håkon sought to bring Iceland under Norwegian control, using the ongoing conflicts as a pretext to assert his authority. The chieftains, weary of the endless violence and recognizing the potential benefits of aligning with a strong monarchy, began to consider the possibility of submitting to Norwegian rule. The turning point came in 1262, when a group of Icelandic chieftains, including Gissur Orvaldsson, traveled to Norway to negotiate with King Håkon. The result of these negotiations was the signing of the Old Covenant, Gamli Sáttmáli, an agreement that brought Iceland under the sovereignty of the Norwegian crown. The Old Covenant marked the formal end of the Icelandic Commonwealth and the beginning of a new era of foreign rule. Under the terms of the Old Covenant, Iceland retained a degree of autonomy, with the Alþingi continuing to function as the island's legislative assembly. However, the Gore were now required to pledge allegiance to the Norwegian king, and Iceland was obligated to pay tribute to the crown. In return, the Norwegian king promised to protect Iceland and provide it with support, particularly in times of need. The signing of the Old Covenant effectively marked the end of Icelandic independence, as the island became a part of the Norwegian realm. The submission to Norwegian rule brought an end to the internal conflicts that had plagued Iceland during the Sturlung era. With the backing of the Norwegian crown, Gissur Orvaldsson was appointed as the king's representative in Iceland, tasked with maintaining order and enforcing the king's authority. The end of the Commonwealth period was a turning point in Iceland's history, as the island's political structure was fundamentally altered. The age of the Sturlungs and the fall of the Icelandic Commonwealth represent a period of profound change in Icelandic society. The internal conflicts of the 13th century exposed the weaknesses of the decentralized system of governance and highlighted the challenges of maintaining unity in the absence of a central authority. The decision to submit to Norwegian rule was seen by many as a necessary step to restore peace and stability to the island, but it also marked the loss of the independence that had defined Icelandic society for centuries. Despite the end of the Commonwealth, the legacy of this period continued to influence Icelandic culture and identity. The Icelandic sagas, many of which were written or preserved during this time, remained a vital part of the nation's cultural heritage, offering insights into the values, beliefs, and struggles of the early Icelanders. The Alþingi, although now functioning under the authority of a foreign crown, continued to serve as a symbol of Icelandic self-governance and legal tradition. The fall of the Icelandic Commonwealth and the submission to Norwegian rule were not the end of Iceland's story, but rather the beginning of a new chapter in the island's history. In the centuries that followed, Iceland would continue to navigate the challenges of foreign rule, economic hardship, and social change, all while maintaining a strong sense of cultural identity and resilience. The submission of Iceland to Norwegian rule in the 13th century marked a significant shift in the island's history, as Iceland became part of a larger Scandinavian realm. Over the next few centuries, Iceland would experience the challenges of foreign dominance, economic hardship, and political changes as it transitioned from Norwegian to Danish rule. Despite these difficulties, Icelandic society demonstrated remarkable resilience, maintaining its cultural identity and traditions even as external pressures grew. This chapter explores Iceland's experience under Norwegian and Danish rule, the impact of foreign governance on the island, and the ways in which the Icelandic people preserved their unique heritage. After the signing of the Old Covenant Gamli Sáttmáli in 1262, Iceland became a dependency of the Norwegian crown. While the island retained some degree of autonomy, with the Alþingi continuing to function as a legislative body, the authority of the Norwegian king was now paramount. The king's representative in Iceland, known as the Herstri, was responsible for overseeing the administration of the island, enforcing royal decrees, and collecting taxes. This arrangement marked the beginning of a new era in Icelandic governance, as the island's chieftains, who had once wielded significant power, now found themselves subordinate to a foreign ruler. One of the most significant impacts of Norwegian rule on Iceland was the imposition of a new legal and administrative system. While the Alþingi continued to play a role in lawmaking, the king's authority was increasingly asserted through royal decrees and the establishment of a formal bureaucracy. This shift in governance reflected broader trends in medieval Europe, where monarchies were consolidating power and centralizing their administrations. In Iceland, however, these changes were met with resistance from those who were accustomed to the decentralized and consensus-based system of the Commonwealth period. Economically, the transition to Norwegian rule brought both challenges and opportunities for Iceland. The island's economy was primarily based on agriculture, with sheep farming being the dominant activity. However, Iceland's harsh climate and limited arable land made farming a difficult and often precarious endeavor. Fishing also played a crucial role in the Icelandic economy, and the island's waters were rich in fish, particularly cod. Under Norwegian rule, Iceland became increasingly integrated into the North Atlantic trade network, with fish and wool being the primary exports. Despite the potential for economic growth, Iceland's economy was hampered by several factors. The island's remote location, combined with the limited infrastructure, made trade difficult and costly. Additionally, the imposition of taxes and the monopolization of trade by the Norwegian crown placed further strain on the economy. Many Icelandic farmers and fishermen struggled to make a living, and the island's population remained relatively small and dispersed. The late 14th century brought further changes to Iceland's political situation. In 1380, the crowns of Norway and Denmark were united under the Kalmar Union, a political entity that also included Sweden. This union marked the beginning of Danish dominance in Iceland, as the island was now ruled by the Danish king, who also held the title of King of Norway. The shift from Norwegian to Danish rule had significant implications for Iceland, as the island became more closely tied to the political and economic interests of Denmark. Under Danish rule, Iceland's autonomy was further eroded. The Alþingi continued to function as a legislative body, but its authority was increasingly limited by the Danish crown. The king's representatives in Iceland, known as syslumenn, sheriffs, and later amtmenn, governors, were responsible for enforcing royal policies and overseeing the administration of justice. These officials, often appointed from Denmark or Norway, had considerable power and were often resented by the Icelandic population. One of the most significant changes during Danish rule was the imposition of a trade monopoly in the early 17th century. In 1602, King Christian IV of Denmark established the Danish-Icelandic trade monopoly, which restricted all trade in Iceland to licensed Danish merchants. This monopoly was intended to increase the crown's control over Iceland's economy and to generate revenue for the Danish state. However, the monopoly had disastrous effects on the Icelandic economy, as it limited competition, increased prices, and reduced the quality of goods available on the island. The trade monopoly led to widespread poverty and hardship in Iceland, as farmers and fishermen struggled to make a living under the restrictive trade regime. The isolation of Iceland, combined with the harsh climate and frequent volcanic eruptions, further exacerbated the island's economic difficulties. The 17th and 18th centuries were particularly challenging for Iceland, as the island experienced a series of natural disasters, including volcanic eruptions, famines, and epidemics, which decimated the population and left many communities in ruins. Despite these hardships, Icelandic society demonstrated remarkable resilience. The island's strong oral tradition, centered around the sagas and other forms of storytelling, helped to preserve the cultural identity of the Icelandic people during these difficult times. The sagas, which had been written down in the 13th century, continued to be read and recited, serving as a reminder of Iceland's proud history and heritage. The Icelandic language, which had remained largely unchanged since the settlement period, also played a crucial role in maintaining a sense of national identity. Religion also played an important role in the preservation of Icelandic culture. The Lutheran Reformation, which swept through Scandinavia in the 16th century, reached Iceland in the 1540s, leading to the establishment of the Lutheran Church as the official religion of the island. The Reformation brought significant changes to religious practices in Iceland, including the translation of the Bible into Icelandic and the establishment of a formal church hierarchy. The church became a central institution in Icelandic society, providing spiritual guidance, education, and social support. The resilience of the Icelandic people was also evident in their ability to adapt to the changing economic and political landscape. Despite the challenges posed by the trade monopoly and the harsh environment, Icelanders developed innovative strategies for survival. Fishing became increasingly important as a source of income, particularly as advances in technology allowed for more efficient harvesting of fish. The production of wool and other textiles also provided a vital source of income, particularly for women, who played a key role in the domestic economy. By the late 18th century, the Danish crown began to recognize the detrimental effects of the trade monopoly on Iceland's economy. In 1787, the monopoly was officially abolished, allowing for greater competition and trade with other countries. This change, along with improvements in agriculture and fishing, helped to stabilize the Icelandic economy and laid the groundwork for future growth. The late 18th century also saw the beginning of a cultural and intellectual revival in Iceland, known as the Icelandic Enlightenment. This movement was characterized by a renewed interest in Icelandic history, literature, and language, as well as a growing sense of national identity. Icelandic scholars and writers, inspired by the ideas of the European Enlightenment, sought to preserve and promote Icelandic culture, while also advocating for greater autonomy from Danish rule. The struggle for autonomy and the preservation of Icelandic identity during this period laid the foundation for the independence movement of the 19th and early 20th centuries. The challenges of foreign domination, economic hardship, and natural disasters had tested the resilience of the Icelandic people, but they had also strengthened their sense of identity and determination to maintain their unique culture. As Iceland entered the 19th century, the island was poised for a new chapter in its history, one that would be marked by the rise of the independence movement, the eventual achievement of sovereignty, and the emergence of Iceland as a modern nation-state. As the 19th century dawned, Iceland found itself at a crossroads. After centuries of foreign domination under Norwegian and then Danish rule, the island's cultural and political identity was undergoing a profound transformation. This period, marked by the rise of Icelandic nationalism and a growing desire for self-determination, laid the foundation for Iceland's eventual independence. This chapter explores the cultural and political awakening of Iceland in the 19th century, the emergence of the independence movement, and the key figures and events that shaped the island's path toward sovereignty. The seeds of Icelandic nationalism were sown in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, during a period of cultural revival known as the Icelandic Enlightenment. This movement was inspired by the broader European Enlightenment, which emphasized reason, individual rights, and the importance of national identity. In Iceland, scholars and intellectuals began to rediscover and celebrate the island's rich literary and historical heritage, particularly the sagas and other medieval texts that chronicled the deeds of the early Icelanders. One of the most influential figures of this period was Jónas Hallgrímsson, a poet, naturalist, and key figure in the Icelandic independence movement. Born in 1807, Jónas was deeply influenced by the Romantic movement, which emphasized the importance of national identity and the connection between people and their homeland. Jónas and his contemporaries sought to revive the Icelandic language and culture, viewing them as essential components of the nation's identity. His poetry, which often celebrated the natural beauty of Iceland and the heroism of its people, played a significant role in fostering a sense of national pride. Jónas was also one of the founders of the journal Fjölnir, which was established in 1835 and became a key platform for the promotion of Icelandic culture and independence. Fjölnir published articles on a wide range of topics, including literature, history, politics, and science, all with the aim of educating and inspiring the Icelandic people. The journal also advocated for reforms in the Danish administration of Iceland, calling for greater autonomy and the revival of the Alþingi as a legislative body. The revival of the Alþingi was a central demand of the independence movement. The Alþingi, which had been established in 930 AD during the Commonwealth period, had continued to function under Norwegian and Danish rule, but its role had been significantly diminished. By the early 19th century, the Alþingi had been reduced to an advisory body with little real power. Nationalists like Jón Sigurðsson, another leading figure in the independence movement, saw the restoration of the Alþingi as a symbol of Iceland's sovereignty and a crucial step towards self-governance. Jón Sigurðsson, often referred to as the father of Icelandic independence, was born in 1811 in the Westfjords region of Iceland. After studying in Denmark, Jón became a passionate advocate for Icelandic autonomy. He believed that Iceland had the right to govern itself, and he worked tirelessly to achieve this goal through both political activism and scholarly work. John's extensive knowledge of Icelandic history and law allowed him to argue convincingly that Iceland's union with Norway and later Denmark had been based on mutual agreements that could be renegotiated. In 1843, largely due to the efforts of John Sigurðsson and his supporters, the Danish king agreed to re-establish the Alþingi as a consultative assembly. The Alþingi was revived in 1845, and its meetings were held in Reykjavik, marking a significant step toward Icelandic self-governance. However, the Alþingi's powers remained limited, and it was still subject to the authority of the Danish crown. The mid-19th century was also a time of significant social and economic change in Iceland. The island's population was growing, but its economy remained heavily dependent on agriculture and fishing, both of which were vulnerable to the harsh climate and environmental conditions. The trade monopoly imposed by Denmark had been lifted in the late 18th century, but Iceland's economy continued to struggle, with many people living in poverty. The desire for greater economic opportunities and political autonomy fueled the independence movement, as Icelanders increasingly sought to take control of their own destiny. The movement was supported by a growing middle class of farmers, merchants, and intellectuals who were inspired by the nationalist movements sweeping across Europe at the time. In 1851, a significant event known as the National Assembly, Tjfundrun, was held in Reykjavik. This assembly was called by the Danish king to discuss the future of Iceland's political status within the Danish kingdom. John Sigurðsson and other leaders of the independence movement saw this as an opportunity to press for greater autonomy. At the assembly, John delivered a powerful speech in which he argued that Iceland should have its own constitution and full legislative powers. The assembly overwhelmingly supported John's proposals, but the Danish authorities rejected them, leading to widespread frustration and anger among the Icelandic population. Despite this setback, the independence movement continued to gain momentum. John Sigurðsson and his supporters persisted in their efforts to secure greater autonomy for Iceland, using both political pressure and legal arguments. The movement was also bolstered by the broader context of European politics, where nationalist movements were challenging the dominance of multi-ethnic empires and calling for the recognition of national self-determination. In 1874, on the occasion of the 1000th anniversary of the settlement of Iceland, King Christian IX of Denmark granted Iceland a constitution. This constitution provided for a limited degree of self-government, with the Alþingi being given legislative powers over certain domestic matters. However, ultimate authority remained with the Danish crown, and the king retained the power to veto laws passed by the Alþingi. While the 1874 constitution was a significant step forward, it fell short of the full autonomy that many Icelanders desired. The late 19th and early 20th centuries saw continued efforts to expand Iceland's self-governance. The Alþingi gradually gained more powers, and in 1904, Iceland achieved home rule, with an Icelandic minister responsible for domestic affairs. This development marked a major milestone in Iceland's journey toward full independence, as it allowed Icelanders to have greater control over their own government. Throughout this period, the independence movement remained focused on the goal of full sovereignty. John Sigurðsson's legacy continued to inspire future generations of Icelanders, who viewed his efforts as the foundation of their struggle for independence. The movement also emphasized the importance of preserving Icelandic culture, language, and traditions, which were seen as essential components of the nation's identity. The early 20th century brought significant changes to the global political landscape, particularly in the aftermath of World War I. The collapse of several empires and the rise of new nation-states created an environment in which calls for self-determination gained greater international support. Iceland's independence movement capitalized on these developments, renewing its efforts to achieve full sovereignty. In 1918, Iceland and Denmark reached an agreement known as the Act of Union, which recognized Iceland as a fully sovereign state in personal union with Denmark. Under the terms of the Act, Iceland shared a common monarchy with Denmark, but it had full control over its domestic and foreign affairs. The Act of Union was a significant achievement for the independence movement, as it marked the formal recognition of Iceland's sovereignty on the international stage. The Act of Union was set to be reviewed after 25 years, giving Iceland the opportunity to reconsider its relationship with Denmark. This provision would prove crucial in the next phase of Iceland's independence, as the island continued to move toward full independence in the mid-20th century. The 19th century independence movement was a pivotal period in Iceland's history, laying the groundwork for the island's eventual emergence as a fully sovereign nation. The efforts of figures like John Sigurðsson and Jonas Hallgrímsson, combined with the broader cultural revival of the Icelandic Enlightenment, helped to foster a strong sense of national identity and pride. As Iceland entered the 20th century, the island was poised to achieve the full independence that generations of Icelanders had fought for, marking the culmination of a long and determined struggle. The early 20th century marked a period of significant political and social change for Iceland, as the island continued its gradual journey toward full independence. The shifting global landscape, particularly during and after World War I, created new opportunities for Iceland to assert its sovereignty. This chapter explores the key events that led to Iceland's full independence, its strategic importance during World War II, and the eventual establishment of the Republic of Iceland in 1944. The Act of Union of 1918 was a major milestone in Iceland's quest for independence. It recognized Iceland as a fully sovereign state in personal union with Denmark, meaning that the two countries shared a common monarch but had separate governments and legal systems. The act granted Iceland control over its domestic and foreign affairs, including the right to establish diplomatic relations with other countries. However, the agreement also included a provision that allowed for the renegotiation of the union after 25 years, which would later become a crucial factor in Iceland's path to full independence. The years following the Act of Union saw Iceland gradually assert its sovereignty on the international stage. The country established its first foreign embassies and consulates, forging diplomatic ties with other nations. Iceland also took steps to modernize its economy and infrastructure, which were still heavily dependent on agriculture and fishing. The fishing industry, in particular, became increasingly important as Iceland expanded its territorial waters and sought to protect its vital fishing grounds from foreign exploitation. The global economic depression of the 1930s had a significant impact on Iceland, as it did on many other countries. The collapse of international markets and the decline in demand for Icelandic fish and agricultural products led to economic hardship and widespread unemployment. However, the depression also fueled a growing sense of nationalism and a desire for greater control over Iceland's economic and political destiny. The economic challenges of the 1930s strengthened the resolve of Icelandic leaders to pursue full independence from Denmark. As the 25-year review of the Act of Union approached in 1943, Icelandic leaders began preparing for the possibility of severing the union with Denmark. However, the outbreak of World War II in 1939 complicated these plans. Denmark was occupied by Nazi Germany in April 1940, effectively cutting off communication between Iceland and the Danish government. In response to the occupation, the Alþingi declared that Iceland would take over the functions of the Danish king in matters of foreign policy and defense, effectively making Iceland a fully independent state in all but name. Iceland's strategic location in the North Atlantic made it of great interest to both the Allied and Axis powers during World War II. Control of the island was seen as crucial for securing vital shipping lanes and protecting convoys from German U-boats. In May 1940, shortly after the German occupation of Denmark, British forces launched Operation Fork, an invasion of Iceland. The British occupation was initially met with some resistance, but the Icelandic government ultimately accepted the occupation as a necessary measure to protect the island from German invasion. The British occupation of Iceland was later replaced by a U.S. occupation in July 1941, after Iceland formally requested American assistance. The United States, which was not yet involved in the war, agreed to defend Iceland as part of its broader strategy to secure the North Atlantic. The U.S. presence in Iceland brought significant economic benefits to the island, as thousands of American troops were stationed there, leading to increased demand for local goods and services. The experience of foreign occupation during World War II had a profound impact on Icelandic society. While the island was spared the devastation of war that affected much of Europe, the presence of foreign troops highlighted the importance of full sovereignty and self-determination. The war also accelerated Iceland's economic modernization, as the influx of foreign currency and investment helped to improve infrastructure and boost the fishing industry. As the war drew to a close, the question of Iceland's political status came to the forefront. The 25-year review of the Act of Union was due in 1943, but due to the ongoing war, the Alþingi decided to postpone any decision until after the conflict had ended. However, the momentum for full independence was growing, and it became increasingly clear that Icelanders were ready to establish a republic and sever the remaining ties with Denmark. In 1944, with the war still raging in Europe, the Alþingi decided to proceed with the establishment of a republic. A national referendum was held in May 1944, in which an overwhelming majority of Icelanders voted in favor of terminating the union with Denmark and declaring Iceland a republic. The decision was made to time the Declaration of Independence to coincide with Iceland's National Day on June 17th, which also marked the birthday of Jón Sigurðsson, the leader of Iceland's independence movement. On June 17, 1944, in a ceremony held at Ingvellir, the historic site of the Alþingi, Iceland was formally declared a republic. Sveinn Björnsson, who had served as regent since 1941, was elected as the first president of Iceland. The ceremony at Ingvellir was a symbolic and emotional moment for the Icelandic people, marking the culmination of a centuries-long struggle for independence and the beginning of a new chapter in the island's history. The establishment of the Republic of Iceland was met with mixed reactions internationally. Denmark, still under German occupation, was unable to formally respond to the declaration at the time, but after the war, the Danish government officially recognized Iceland's independence and the dissolution of the Union. The peaceful and democratic manner in which Iceland achieved its independence was widely admired, and the new republic quickly gained recognition from other nations. Following the Declaration of Independence, Iceland continued to build its identity as a sovereign nation. The country joined the United Nations in 1946 and became a founding member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, in 1949. Iceland's membership in NATO was driven by its strategic location and the desire to ensure its security in the emerging Cold War. The decision to join NATO was controversial within Iceland, with some fearing that it would lead to increased foreign influence on the island. However, the government argued that membership was necessary to protect Iceland's independence in a volatile international environment. The post-war period also saw significant economic and social changes in Iceland. The fishing industry remained the backbone of the economy, but efforts were made to diversify and modernize other sectors, including agriculture, manufacturing, and services. The construction of new infrastructure, such as roads, airports, and power plants, helped to support economic growth and improve the standard of living for Icelanders. Education and cultural development were also priorities for the new republic. The University of Iceland, founded in 1911, expanded its programs and facilities, becoming a leading institution of higher learning in the country. The arts and literature flourished, with Icelandic authors, poets, and artists gaining international recognition for their work. The preservation and promotion of the Icelandic language and cultural heritage remained central to the nation's identity. The 20th century was a transformative period for Iceland, as the island evolved from a remote and economically struggling colony to a modern, independent republic. The path to independence was shaped by the determination and resilience of the Icelandic people, who, despite centuries of foreign domination, never lost their sense of identity or their desire for self-determination. The establishment of the Republic of Iceland in 1944 was the culmination of this long and difficult journey, and it marked the beginning of a new era in the island's history. As Iceland moved forward into the second half of the 20th century, it would continue to face challenges and opportunities as a small, independent nation in a rapidly changing world. However, the foundation laid during the independence movement and the early years of the Republic provided a strong basis for the country's future development and success. With the establishment of the Republic of Iceland in 1944, the nation entered a new era of sovereignty and self-determination. However, the challenges of building a modern state from the foundations of a small, isolated economy were immense. Over the following decades, Iceland embarked on a journey of economic transformation, social modernization, and deeper integration into the global community. This chapter explores the post-independence era, focusing on Iceland's economic development, its role in international affairs, and the social changes that shaped the nation's identity in the second half of the 20th century. The immediate post-war years were a time of significant economic transition for Iceland. The fishing industry remained the backbone of the economy, providing the majority of the country's export revenue. However, Icelandic leaders recognized the need to diversify the economy and reduce the nation's dependence on a single industry. This recognition was driven by the volatile nature of the global fish market, as well as the inherent risks associated with overfishing and environmental changes that could impact fish stocks. One of the first major steps toward economic diversification was the expansion of Iceland's energy sector. The island's unique geological features, including its abundant geothermal energy resources and glacial rivers, provided significant opportunities for the development of renewable energy. In the 1950s and 1960s, Iceland invested heavily in hydroelectric and geothermal power plants, which not only provided affordable and sustainable energy for domestic use but also laid the groundwork for the development of energy-intensive industries such as aluminum smelting. The construction of hydroelectric power plants, such as the Berfell and Karenjúkur projects, transformed Iceland's energy landscape. These projects were not without controversy, particularly regarding their environmental impact, but they played a crucial role in modernizing the economy and attracting foreign investment. The availability of cheap and reliable energy made Iceland an attractive location for international companies, particularly in the aluminum industry, which became a key driver of economic growth in the latter half of the 20th century. The modernization of Iceland's economy was also supported by significant improvements in infrastructure. The construction of roads, bridges, airports, and ports facilitated the movement of goods and people, both within Iceland and to international markets. The development of Reykjavik as a modern capital city, with improved public services, housing, and cultural institutions, helped to attract investment and foster a growing middle class. The fishing industry continued to play a vital role in Iceland's economy, but it also became the center of one of the most significant international disputes in Iceland's post-independence history, the Cod Wars. These were a series of confrontations between Iceland and the United Kingdom over fishing rights in the North Atlantic. The First Cod War began in the late 1950s, when Iceland unilaterally extended its fishing limits from 4 nautical miles to 12 nautical miles off its coast. The UK, whose fishing fleets had traditionally operated in these waters, objected to the extension and sent warships to protect its trawlers from Icelandic patrol boats. The dispute escalated in the 1970s with 2 more Cod Wars, during which Iceland further extended its fishing limits to 50 nautical miles in 1972 and then to 200 nautical miles in 1975. These extensions were part of Iceland's strategy to protect its vital fishing industry from overexploitation by foreign fleets. The Cod Wars were characterized by aggressive encounters between Icelandic Coast Guard vessels and British trawlers, leading to diplomatic tensions between the two countries. Iceland's strategic use of its membership in NATO and its close relationship with the United States played a crucial role in the resolution of the Cod Wars. Iceland threatened to withdraw from NATO if its demands were not met, a move that alarmed its Western allies given the island's strategic location during the Cold War. Ultimately, the UK agreed to recognize Iceland's extended fishing limits, and the Cod Wars ended with Iceland achieving its goal of exclusive control over its fishing grounds. The outcome of the Cod Wars was a significant victory for Iceland, both economically and politically, as it secured the long-term sustainability of its fishing industry and asserted its sovereignty on the international stage. In addition to its economic and territorial achievements, Iceland also made significant strides in social development during the post-independence era. The expansion of education, healthcare, and social services contributed to a higher standard of living for the Icelandic population. The University of Iceland, which had been established in 1911, grew in size and influence, becoming a key institution for the education of Iceland's future leaders. The expansion of the welfare state provided greater security for Icelanders, particularly in areas such as healthcare, pensions, and unemployment benefits. The post-war period also saw the rise of a vibrant cultural scene in Iceland. The nation's rich literary tradition, which had its roots in the medieval sagas, continued to thrive with contemporary Icelandic authors gaining international recognition. Writers such as Halldór Laxness, who won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1955, played a significant role in bringing Icelandic culture to a global audience. Laxness's works, which often explored themes of social justice, nationalism, and the human condition, resonated with readers both in Iceland and abroad. The arts in Iceland flourished during this period, with the establishment of institutions such as the National Theatre of Iceland and the Reykjavik Arts Festival. Music, visual arts, and film also became increasingly important components of Icelandic culture, reflecting the country's growing engagement with the wider world. Iceland's cultural output was not only a source of national pride, but also a means of asserting its identity on the global stage. Iceland's foreign policy during the Cold War era was characterized by its strategic alliances and its commitment to maintaining its independence. The presence of a U.S. military base at Keflavik, established during World War II, became a point of contention within Icelandic society. While the base was seen as an important element of Iceland's defense strategy within NATO, it also sparked debates about the influence of foreign powers on Icelandic sovereignty. The Keflavik base remained operational until 2006 when it was closed as part of a broader reconfiguration of U.S. military assets in Europe. Throughout the second half of the 20th century, Iceland maintained a careful balance between its strategic alliances and its commitment to neutrality in global conflicts. The country's small size and geographic isolation allowed it to play a unique role in international diplomacy, often acting as a mediator in disputes between larger powers. Iceland's status as a founding member of NATO, combined with its strong ties to the Nordic countries, positioned it as an important player in both regional and global affairs. The late 20th century also saw Iceland take on a more active role in international environmental issues. The country's reliance on renewable energy sources, such as geothermal and hydroelectric power, positioned it as a leader in the global movement towards sustainable development. Iceland's natural beauty and commitment to environmental conservation became important aspects of its national identity, attracting tourists from around the world and contributing to the growth of the tourism industry. By the end of the 20th century, Iceland had undergone a remarkable transformation. From a remote and economically struggling colony, it had emerged as a modern, independent republic with a thriving economy, a strong sense of national identity, and an active role in international affairs. The challenges of the post-independence era, from economic modernization to the assertion of sovereignty, had been met with resilience and determination by the Icelandic people. As Iceland entered the 21st century, it faced new challenges and opportunities in an increasingly interconnected world. The foundations laid during the post-independence era provided a strong basis for the country's continued development, while also preserving the unique cultural heritage that had sustained the Icelandic people for centuries. As Iceland entered the 21st century, it faced both the promise of continued prosperity and the challenges of navigating an increasingly complex global landscape. The first decade of the new millennium brought unprecedented economic growth, but it also exposed the vulnerabilities of Iceland's financial system. The 2008 financial crisis, which led to the collapse of Iceland's major banks, was a turning point in the nation's history. However, the crisis also demonstrated the resilience of the Icelandic people, who embarked on a path of recovery and renewal. This chapter explores Iceland's experiences in the 21st century, focusing on the financial crisis, the country's recovery, and its ongoing contributions to global issues such as environmental sustainability and digital innovation. In the years leading up to the financial crisis, Iceland experienced a period of rapid economic expansion. The liberalization of the financial sector, combined with favorable global economic conditions, led to a boom in banking and investment. Iceland's major banks, Kaupthing, Landsbanki, and Glitnir, expanded aggressively, both domestically and internationally, offering high interest rates to attract foreign deposits and engaging in speculative investments. This expansion was fueled by cheap credit and a surge of foreign capital, which led to a significant increase in the standard of living for many Icelanders. However, the rapid growth of Iceland's financial sector also created significant risks. The bank's reliance on short-term borrowing, combined with their exposure to volatile global markets, made them vulnerable to a sudden loss of confidence. The situation was exacerbated by the small size of Iceland's economy relative to the scale of its financial sector, which by 2008 had assets that were several times the country's GDP. This imbalance left Iceland particularly exposed when the global financial crisis began to unfold. The collapse of Lehman Brothers in September 2008 triggered a global credit crunch, which quickly spread to Iceland. As international lenders and investors withdrew their support, Iceland's banks found themselves unable to meet their obligations. Within weeks, all three of Iceland's major banks had collapsed, leading to a financial meltdown that reverberated across the country. The government was forced to nationalize the banks, but the scale of the crisis was overwhelming, with the Icelandic krona plummeting in value and the country teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. The financial crisis had devastating effects on Iceland's economy and society. Unemployment soared, businesses failed, and many Icelanders found themselves burdened with unmanageable debts. The crisis also led to widespread public anger and protests, as citizens demanded accountability from the government and the financial sector for the reckless practices that had led to the collapse. In January 2009, Prime Minister Geir Haarde resigned, and early elections were held, leading to the formation of a new government led by Jóhanna Sigurðardóttir, Iceland's first female prime minister and the world's first openly gay head of government. The new government faced the daunting task of stabilizing the economy and restoring public confidence. Iceland turned to the International Monetary Fund, IMF, for assistance, securing a $2.1 billion loan to support the country's recovery efforts. The government implemented a series of austerity measures, including spending cuts and tax increases, to restore fiscal stability. However, it also took steps to protect the most vulnerable members of society, maintaining social welfare programs and providing relief to households struggling with mortgage debt. One of the key components of Iceland's recovery was the restructuring of the banking sector. The government established new banks to take over the domestic operations of the failed institutions, while the old banks were placed into receivership to manage their foreign liabilities. This approach, combined with capital controls to prevent capital flight, helped to stabilize the financial system and restore confidence in the economy. Iceland's recovery from the financial crisis was aided by several factors. The country's flexible exchange rate allowed the krona to depreciate, boosting exports and tourism. The fishing industry, which had remained relatively insulated from the crisis, continued to provide a stable source of income. Additionally, Iceland's strong social cohesion and commitment to democratic governance enabled the country to navigate the crisis without significant social unrest. By 2011, Iceland's economy had begun to recover, and the country was once again experiencing positive growth. The government gradually lifted capital controls, and the banking sector was restructured to focus on domestic lending rather than speculative investments. The IMF praised Iceland's recovery as a model for other countries, highlighting the importance of protecting social welfare and allowing the banking sector to fail rather than bailing out reckless financial institutions. The lessons of the financial crisis had a lasting impact on Icelandic society. There was a renewed emphasis on ethical business practices, transparency, and accountability in both the public and private sectors. The crisis also led to a broader rethinking of Iceland's economic model, with a shift away from the excessive risk-taking that had characterized the pre-crisis years. The experience of the crisis reinforced the importance of resilience, adaptability, and social solidarity in the face of external shocks. In the years following the crisis, Iceland also became a global leader in several key areas, including environmental sustainability and digital innovation. The country's abundant renewable energy resources, particularly geothermal and hydroelectric power, positioned it at the forefront of the global transition to clean energy. Iceland's commitment to environmental conservation and sustainability became a central part of its national identity, attracting international attention and investment. The tourism industry, which had been growing steadily before the crisis, experienced a significant boom in the 2010s, driven in part by the global fascination with Iceland's natural beauty and its reputation as a sustainable destination. The eruption of the Age of Geological volcano in 2010, which briefly disrupted air travel across Europe, paradoxically brought even more attention to Iceland, as images of the eruption captivated people around the world. The tourism boom provided a crucial boost to Iceland's post-crisis economy, creating jobs and generating revenue that supported the country's recovery. Iceland also emerged as a leader in digital innovation, with a focus on leveraging technology to enhance governance, transparency, and public participation. The country's small size and highly educated population made it an ideal testing ground for new digital initiatives. One notable example was the drafting of a new constitution in the wake of the financial crisis. The process involved extensive public consultation, including the use of social media and online platforms to gather input from citizens. While the proposed constitution has not yet been fully adopted, the process demonstrated Iceland's commitment to democratic innovation and citizen engagement. As Iceland moved further into the 21st century, it continued to play an active role in international affairs, particularly in areas related to human rights, environmental protection, and Arctic governance. Iceland's strategic location in the North Atlantic and its proximity to the Arctic made it a key player in discussions about the future of the Arctic region, including issues related to climate change, natural resource management, and geopolitical stability. The country's commitment to gender equality also garnered international recognition. Iceland consistently ranked among the top countries in the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report, thanks to its progressive policies on parental leave, equal pay, and women's representation in politics and business. Iceland's approach to gender equality became a model for other countries seeking to close the gender gap and promote social inclusion. In conclusion, the 21st century has been a period of both challenges and opportunities for Iceland. The financial crisis of 2008 was a defining moment in the country's recent history, testing the resilience of its people and institutions. However, Iceland's recovery from the crisis, along with its leadership in areas such as environmental sustainability, digital innovation, and gender equality, has demonstrated the nation's ability to adapt and thrive in an increasingly interconnected world. As Iceland continues to navigate the complexities of the modern era, it remains deeply rooted in the values and traditions that have shaped its identity for over a millennium. The country's journey from a remote and isolated island to a vibrant, independent republic is a testament to the strength, resilience, and determination of the Icelandic people. As Iceland progresses further into the 21st century, the nation continues to confront new challenges and embrace fresh opportunities. From navigating the complexities of a globalized economy to addressing the impacts of climate change, Iceland is at a critical juncture in its history. This chapter explores the current state of Iceland, the challenges it faces, the opportunities that lie ahead, and the enduring importance of cultural identity in shaping the nation's future. One of the primary challenges for Iceland today is the continued diversification of its economy. While the fishing industry remains a cornerstone of Iceland's economic activity, the nation has made significant strides in expanding other sectors, particularly tourism, renewable energy, and technology. However, the rapid growth of tourism, which now accounts for a substantial portion of Iceland's GDP, has raised concerns about the sustainability of the industry and its impact on the environment. Tourism has brought many benefits to Iceland, including job creation, infrastructure development, and increased international visibility. However, the influx of visitors, peaking at over 2 million annually before the COVID-19 pandemic, has also put pressure on Iceland's natural resources, public services, and local communities. The delicate balance between promoting tourism and preserving Iceland's unique landscapes and cultural heritage is a key issue for policymakers and the tourism industry. In response to these challenges, Iceland has taken steps to promote sustainable tourism practices, such as limiting the number of visitors to sensitive natural sites, encouraging eco-friendly accommodations, and investing in infrastructure that minimizes environmental impact. The goal is to ensure that tourism remains a viable and responsible part of Iceland's economy while protecting the island's natural beauty for future generations. Renewable energy continues to be a major focus for Iceland, with the country leading the world in the use of geothermal and hydroelectric power. These renewable energy sources provide nearly 100% of Iceland's electricity needs, making the country a model for sustainable energy development. Iceland's expertise in geothermal energy, in particular, has positioned it as a global leader in this field, with Icelandic companies and experts playing a key role in geothermal projects around the world. Looking ahead, Iceland faces the challenge of maintaining its leadership in renewable energy while addressing the broader impacts of climate change. The effects of global warming are already being felt in Iceland, with glaciers retreating, temperatures rising, and weather patterns becoming more unpredictable. These changes have significant implications for Iceland's environment, economy, and way of life, particularly in sectors such as agriculture, fishing, and tourism. To address these challenges, Iceland has committed to ambitious climate goals, including achieving carbon neutrality by 2040. The country is investing in new technologies and practices to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, such as carbon capture and storage, the electrification of transport, and sustainable land use practices. Iceland is also working to raise awareness about the impacts of climate change and the importance of global cooperation in addressing this existential threat. As a small, geographically isolated nation, Iceland has embraced digital innovation as a means of overcoming its physical limitations and enhancing its global connectivity. The country's highly educated population, robust digital infrastructure, and strong support for research and development have made Iceland a hub for technology and innovation. Iceland's focus on digital solutions is evident in its thriving startup ecosystem, which has produced successful companies in areas such as software development, gaming, and fintech. The Icelandic government has prioritized the digital transformation of public services, making it easier for citizens to access government services online and participate in the democratic process. Iceland's digital government initiatives have been recognized internationally for their efficiency, transparency, and user-centered design. The country's small size and cohesive society make it an ideal testing ground for new digital solutions, which can then be scaled up and adapted for use in larger countries. Iceland's commitment to digital innovation is also reflected in its education system, which emphasizes the importance of digital literacy and entrepreneurship. Icelandic schools and universities are incorporating digital skills into their curricula, preparing students for careers in the global knowledge economy. The country's focus on education and innovation is essential for maintaining its competitive edge in an increasingly interconnected and technology-driven world. Throughout its history, Iceland's strong sense of cultural identity has been a unifying force for the nation, providing a foundation for resilience and adaptability in the face of challenges. This cultural identity is deeply rooted in Iceland's language, literature, and traditions, which have been preserved and celebrated through the centuries. As Iceland continues to evolve and engage with the wider world, the preservation of its cultural heritage remains a priority. The Icelandic language, which has changed little since the medieval period, is a key aspect of the nation's identity. The language connects Icelanders to their rich literary heritage, including the sagas and eddas, which are considered national treasures. Icelandic is also a living language used in everyday communication, education, and the media. Efforts to promote and protect the Icelandic language include language planning policies, educational programs, and the development of new Icelandic words to keep pace with technological advancements. Iceland's commitment to cultural preservation is also evident in its support for the arts, literature, and cultural institutions. The country's vibrant cultural scene, including its music, film, and visual arts, continues to gain international recognition. Icelandic artists and creators are celebrated for their innovation and creativity, often drawing inspiration from the island's unique landscapes and history. Social cohesion is another important aspect of Icelandic society. The country's small population and high level of social trust have contributed to a strong sense of community and collective responsibility. Iceland's egalitarian values are reflected in its social policies, which prioritize equality, inclusivity, and support for vulnerable groups. The country's welfare system, which includes universal health care, education, and social services, plays a crucial role in maintaining social stability and reducing inequality. In recent years, Iceland has also made significant strides in gender equality and LGBTQ+ rights. The country consistently ranks among the top nations in the world for gender equality, thanks to progressive policies such as parental leave, equal pay, and women's representation in leadership positions. Iceland's LGBTQ+ community has also achieved greater visibility and acceptance, with legal protections and social support ensuring that all Icelanders can live with dignity and respect. As a small nation with limited resources, Iceland has always had to carefully navigate its role in the global community. The country's strategic location in the North Atlantic and its membership in international organizations such as NATO and the United Nations have given Iceland a platform to contribute to global discussions on issues such as peace, security, and human rights. Iceland has also played a leading role in Arctic governance, recognizing the region's growing importance due to climate change, natural resource development, and geopolitical tensions. Iceland is a member of the Arctic Council, an intergovernmental forum that promotes cooperation among Arctic states and indigenous peoples on issues such as environmental protection, sustainable development, and scientific research. Iceland's participation in Arctic governance reflects its commitment to protecting the fragile Arctic environment and ensuring that the region remains a zone of peace and cooperation. The country's foreign policy is guided by its commitment to multilateralism, human rights, and environmental sustainability. Iceland has been an outspoken advocate for gender equality on the global stage, using its influence to promote women's rights and empowerment in international forums. The country's leadership on environmental issues, particularly in the areas of renewable energy and climate change, has earned Iceland a reputation as a model for sustainable development. Looking ahead, Iceland will continue to face the challenges and opportunities of a rapidly changing world. The country's ability to adapt to new circumstances, while preserving its unique cultural identity, will be key to its success in the years to come. As Iceland navigates the complexities of globalization, climate change, and technological innovation, it will remain grounded in the values that have sustained it for over a millennium: resilience, community, and a deep connection to the land and its heritage. The story of Iceland is one of transformation and continuity, of a people who have weathered the storms of history and emerged stronger and more connected to the world than ever before. As Iceland looks to the future, it does so with confidence, knowing that its past provides a solid foundation for whatever lies ahead.